This is the story of how one woman's love of the sea led her to become a treasure hunter. Today's story is called From the Ocean to the Cloud.
Season 2 of the story features 12 trailblazers who started a business that changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. And now, on to the story.
The young girl splashed in the ocean. Dee loved everything about it, except the seagulls overhead. The birds would cost her money if she wasn't careful. As one swooped down low to the water, she dashed in front of it and scared it away. She looked down at her fishing line and trap in the water. Success. Dee reached down and pulled the 2 crabs up and into her bucket of salt water. Crabbing wasn't that lucrative, but she loved it and could make up to $5 a crab. The ocean and water were like a second home to her, and the young girl soon became a windsurfer and a sailor. In the summers, she was on the water, and in the winters, she was ice skating. Dee was an opportunist. When she was 19 years old, she helped organize the Windsurfing World Championship. When she was 21, she won the Women's Dinghy Championship. Off the water, she completed a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Vermont. Then it was on to a master's in naval architecture from MIT. With an impressive education and experience on the water, Dee got a job offer to design offshore oil rigs. She jumped at the chance. After she accepted the job, she was ready for a new adventure. Then she learned she wasn't going to be allowed to visit any oil rigs because she was a woman. Frustrated and with no adventures in sight, she quit and moved to Hawaii. There, she found a role at the engineering department of Windsurfing International. Next, she took a more advanced engineering role that opened up at Coleman, the outdoor retailer. Finally, she met someone that knew a group of ocean treasure hunters. She would join them on their mission to explore a sunken Spanish galleon off the shore of Saipan. When she was 33, she felt the winds of change. Engineering was increasingly going to rely on computers and technology. She went back to school and got a second master's degree in computer science. There, in the Bay Area, Dee met her husband Mendel, who was a professor of computer science at Stanford. Back then, it was the early days of the internet, and Silicon Valley was just getting started. Dee was the type of person that Silicon Valley can never get enough of. She was smart, a self-starter, she had a great education, and a litany of real-world experience. She worked for 2 famous Silicon Valley startups, Sybase and Silicon Graphics. At Silicon Graphics, Dee joined, worked like crazy, and helped the young company go from millions to billions in revenue. When she was 42, she had the experience, the capital, and the idea. It was time to take the leap and become an entrepreneur. She founded VXstream, one of the first companies that made it possible to stream media online. In 1997, the dot-com bubble was growing. Dee managed to steer her company safely through the storm. The result? She sold VXstream to Microsoft for $75 million. Technology entrepreneurship seems to be a lot more lucrative than catching $5 crabs. Now, with even more time and capital on her hands, Dee was free to explore new frontiers in technology. Her husband was at the forefront of the revolution. He and several of his grad students were working on the theories that would allow computers and servers to communicate more easily. Impressed by the concept, Dee agreed to support Mendel's efforts. For the next year, she worked on the project with her husband and his students. Later, she would reflect on their collaborative relationship and say, "The difference between a good marriage and a great marriage is conviction." Life was good. They had conviction about their marriage, but their theory wasn't quite there yet. To better develop it, she and Mendel published a research paper on it and sought feedback. It wasn't long before they got a request to read it. It looked like the request was from Nathan M., Rick R., and Bill G. Dee and Mendel looked more into the 3 men. 2 of them were part of Microsoft. One led the R&D department, and Bill G. was Bill Gates. Dee and Mendel rushed to get a patent. They were onto something big. Their theory of virtualization could become a reality, but it was going to require hundreds of millions of dollars and a team of thousands. So why was their theory such a big deal? Because in those days, different brands of computers and servers couldn't share information. Their invention was a virtual program that let any computer talk to any server. It was revolutionary. Dee and her husband founded the company and got to work. The first step was getting an investment. The first promising offer came from a guy she never met. He gave her an address in Palo Alto and told her that he would leave a check outside under a newspaper. When Dee finally found the address, she looked under a newspaper out front, and sure enough, there was a $300,000 check. She got to work and soon had a core team and a proof of concept. With that, she went out, raised, and closed a $20 million investment from a corporate investor. She was ready to build the company. Her treasure hunter pals from back in the day would be jealous if they knew how quickly she locked in big money for her exploration. If you've ever had an idea in your mind's eye and then gone about trying to build it in the real world, then you know what Dee was facing. As T.S. Eliot famously said, between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. Dee was now face to face with the shadow. The shadow was everything that stood in the way between her and taking an academic theory and turning it into a tangible product, and then bringing that product to market and selling it. The money she raised might seem like a lot, but it was actually barely enough to do what she needed. For 6 years, she struggled with her team, and finally, they created the virtual machine that she and Mendel had first proposed in their research paper. When she was 48 years old, she got a buyout offer from a larger company that she couldn't refuse. It was from the giant EMC for $625 million in cash. They wanted to buy her company, VMware. Not only was it a good offer, but the CEO of EMC promised to help her take VMware public. It was music to her ears. When it came time for EMC to help take VMware public, Dee looked at the paperwork and was crestfallen. She would receive only 2.7% equity at a time where the average CEO in a similar situation would receive 7 to 10%. She asked the CEO of EMC about it, and he told her that 2.7% was very fair. He was basically telling her that she was performing far below average. But a simple look at Dee's track record and the numbers proves that her performance was actually far above it. She had led VMware to double its revenues every year since its foundation. When this happens in business, this is proof that you're a miracle worker. That wasn't what the CEO of EMC thought, and he pressured the board until they fired her. The tech world and the markets punished the CEO. VMware stock went down 24% in a single day. 3 top executives quit their jobs in protest. Dee was out, but now she was free to getting back to what she did best, creating something from nothing. Within months, she was investing in new tech startups like Klinkle, Cloud Physics, and Nimbula. She loved investing in other people's visions of the future and their creations. It wasn't long until the itch to start another company returned. Dee started building her next company in stealth. It was called Bebop, a cloud computing startup. Within 3 years, rumors were swirling that there was a tech company that wanted to buy Bebop. Dee couldn't believe it. They just started. But the offer was real, and Google swooped in and bought Bebop for a reported $380 million. Dee accepted and promptly rolled over $148 million of her portion into a donor-advised charity fund. She excitedly joined Google and continued working on Bebop. Okay, fun side note here. If you're wondering what inspired the Bebop name, you're not alone. There are 2 camps here on the mission team. The first feels that Bebop was a name inspired by Bebop and Rocksteady from the Ninja Turtles. The other camp thinks that the Bebop name refers to a type of jazz that started in the 1940s. We may never know the real answer. Dee, of course, is Diane Green. She's a true Renaissance woman, an ocean enthusiast, a crab fisherman, windsurfer, oil rig designer, treasure hunter, research pioneer, startup all-star employee, and a serial tech entrepreneur, and a wife and a mother. Wow. Today, Diane Green is the CEO of Google Cloud. Google Cloud is one of Alphabet Inc.'s, also known as Google's holding company, largest business units. So how does she do it all? One of Diane's most powerful quotes might shed some light on the matter. She says, "Life is too short not to live in peace." Could it be that simple? Could finding peace be a key to discovering and capitalizing on opportunities and success? You'll have to be the judge. Diane's story is proof that with the right attitude, skills, experiences, partners, sacrifices, and the team, maybe it is possible to sail through life. That's her story. What's yours going to be?
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Story. We have an exclusive giveaway for our listeners, 2 free tickets to Salesforce Connections in Chicago on June 12th through June 14th. Salesforce Connections is the digital marketing, commerce, and customer service event of the year. You'll learn how to create personalized experiences at every touchpoint and deliver service that drives growth and exceeds consumer expectations. Head to thestorypodcast.com and enter to win today. That's thestorypodcast.com. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Salesforce, for sharing these stories of business trailblazers who changed the world. Also, join Salesforce on May 1st in San Francisco for an upcoming event called Trailblazing Women. There, we'll hear from successful women in sales and marketing and learn how they've broken the glass ceiling and blazed new trails in their professions. Visit the link in the podcast show notes for more details.
If you like this episode of The Story, please help spread these stories by telling one friend. Also, you can hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Story is created by our team here at The Mission. The Mission is your #1 source for accelerated learning. To get more stories and podcasts like this and our world-class newsletter, subscribe at themission.co. That's themission.co. See you next time.